What happens when one of the world's most beloved actors vanishes into the streets, completely unrecognizable? Keanu Reeves disguised himself as a homeless man not for a role, but to test the people sworn to protect us. What he uncovered on that park bench shocked the entire nation. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The sun hadn't fully risen over the horizon, and the city still held its breath in that quiet space between darkness and noise. Los Angeles, so often loud and relentless, was momentarily still. A cold mist lingered over the sidewalks, and the only movement in the park came from birds hopping between dew-covered branches and the occasional jogger passing through with earbuds in and heads down. On a weathered bench near the edge of the park, a man sat alone. His coat was 2 sizes too large and covered in stains. The sleeves hung past his wrists. The jeans were torn at the knees, muddy and frayed. His boots were mismatched, one cracked along the sole, the other missing half its laces. Dirt caked his fingernails. A paper coffee cup rested loosely in his hands, and beside him lay a faded gray backpack with broken zippers and a half-torn patch that once read Camp Horizon 1984. The man's hair was long, tangled. His beard was full, streaked with gray, unkempt. A knit beanie covered most of his forehead, and his eyes were lowered beneath the shadow it cast. If anyone had bothered to look closely, they might have caught a glimmer of focus behind the ragged exterior. But no one looked closely. Not this early, not at someone like that. The man on the bench was Keanu Reeves. And no one knew. For nearly 2 months, he had prepared for this exact moment, this day, this place, this disguise. He'd worked with a small, trusted circle of activists, social researchers, and legal consultants. Every detail had been planned. Every piece of clothing had been selected not for comfort, but for authenticity. The beard was his, the dirt, real. The backpack was filled with belongings collected from the donation bins of shelters he had quietly visited. Not as a celebrity offering donations, but as a silent observer. He had gone invisible, on purpose. Beneath the bench, tucked just under the wooden slats, was a micro camera no bigger than a coin. His backpack carried another. A third camera was held discreetly by a fellow activist posing as a dog walker nearby. Everything Keanu saw, heard, and experienced today would be streamed live under a pseudonym, and with his face deliberately blurred across an anonymous channel, watched only by a closed circle of civil rights observers and media contacts. He wanted no fame from this. He only wanted truth. He had grown tired, not of acting, not of cameras, but of the headlines. The quiet, everyday brutality suffered by people who didn't have his money, his name, or his face. He had heard too many stories. A woman thrown out of a public library for resting her head on a table. A man shoved against a wall by an officer for asking directions while dressed in ragged clothes. A disabled vet forced to move from a bench because he looked suspicious. All of them invisible, all of them dismissed. Keanu couldn't ignore it anymore, and he didn't want secondhand stories. He wanted to feel it himself. The air grew colder as the sun struggled to push through the overcast sky. Keanu remained still on the bench, holding the coffee cup with both hands, not to sip from it, but simply to keep his fingers from stiffening in the morning chill. His breath rose in soft white wisps. Around him, the city began to stir. A sanitation truck rumbled past the park's edge. A man in a suit walked briskly by on his phone, not once glancing in Keanu's direction. That, more than anything, confirmed what he already knew. People didn't see the homeless. Not really. They saw a problem, a burden, an eyesore, not a person. Weeks before this moment, Keanu had sat in a closed-door meeting with a handful of trusted friends, advocates, journalists, and a nonprofit founder who had spent 20 years documenting abuse of authority. The conversation had begun with a question. What if someone they couldn't ignore became someone they wouldn't look at? That was the seed. They had run drills, tested makeup. Keanu had even spent a few nights on Skid Row. sitting on milk crates and sharing silence with real men and women who lived that life every day. He never told them who he was. He never spoke unless spoken to. He listened, learned, felt. He remembered one man in particular, Marvin, 59 years old, Navy veteran. Marvin had lost everything, job, home, family, after one bad accident and years of medical bills. Keanu had sat beside him under a freeway overpass. Marvin offered half his sandwich without knowing a thing about the man beside him. That gesture haunted Keanu more than anything else. Marvin had been kind, while others, people with clean hands and pressed suits, had recoiled from Keanu as if he were something to be avoided. Now, seated alone in this quiet corner of Griffith Park, Keanu waited. He wasn't looking to provoke anyone. He wasn't here to trap officers. He simply wanted to observe how they reacted to a man who looked like he had nothing. Would they offer help? Would they treat him with dignity? Or would they do what far too many had done to people like Marvin? He didn't have to wait long. A pair of squirrels darted across the path in front of him as a city patrol car slowed down near the entrance gate. Its headlights flickered, and then the engine idled, purring low. Keanu glanced sideways beneath the brim of his hat, careful not to make sudden movements. Two silhouettes sat inside. The driver's door opened first. Boots crunched softly against the gravel path. Keanu didn't shift, didn't flinch. He wasn't afraid, but he was curious whether the men walking toward him would see a threat, a nuisance, or simply a man. Keanu kept his posture relaxed, his shoulders slightly hunched, like someone accustomed to being ignored. He took one slow sip from the lukewarm coffee, letting the bitter taste linger on his tongue. It grounded him, reminded him to stay in the role not of a performer, but of a man who had fallen through the cracks. The cruiser door slammed shut. A second followed. Two officers approached, one with confident, heavy steps, and the other trailing just behind. Keanu watched their boots first. The one in front wore tactical black, polished but scuffed at the toes. The second pair was more worn, duller, frayed at the seams. The officer in front, young, square-jawed and clean-shaven, spoke first. "You can't stay here all day, man." His voice was sharp, but not loud. There was no greeting, no pause, no assumption of conversation, just a command. Keanu didn't answer immediately. He shifted slightly on the bench, as if waking from a light sleep. The second officer, older, broader, with graying hair at the temples, remained silent. His eyes moved slowly across the scene. The bag, the paper cup, Keanu's face. "I'm just resting," Keanu said, his voice low and coarse, practiced over weeks to sound worn down but steady. "Not bothering anyone." The younger officer, name tag reading Jensen, folded his arms. "This is a public park, not a shelter. You need to move." The older one, Rivera, still hadn't spoken. He glanced at Jensen, then back to Keanu. "You got ID?" Jensen asked. Keanu reached into the inner pocket of his coat. Slowly, carefully, no sudden movements. He pulled out a laminated ID. The name read Jonathan M. Reed, age 55. The photo showed a clean-shaven version of the man now seated, wearing glasses and a tie. The face was different enough, thanks to prosthetics and carefully grown hair, to raise questions but not alarms. Jensen took the ID, examined it, then passed it to Rivera. Rivera held it up to the light, squinting slightly. He handed it back with a quiet grunt. "Everything in order?" Keanu asked, his tone neutral. "For now," Jensen muttered, "but I'll be back." The threat wasn't overt, but it hung in the air. Rivera turned to leave. Jensen lingered 1 second longer, eyes narrowing before he finally stepped away. As the cruiser pulled off, the air seemed to reset. Keanu didn't move, not yet. His heart beat steadily, not from fear, but from the unmistakable knowledge that the test had begun. This was no movie, no script. The camera beneath the bench was rolling. So was the one in his backpack. His team would be watching the footage tonight, and he would be ready for whatever came next. As the park came alive with birdsong and footsteps, Keanu looked up at the sky, just for a moment. The clouds were thinning, and the day was just getting started. The sound of tires rolling across gravel broke the park's peaceful rhythm. Keanu didn't move. He already knew who it was. The same cruiser. The same engine. The same two men. The hum of the patrol car's idle filled the space between the trees and the bench where Keanu sat with quiet patience. Doors opened. Boots touched ground. Officer Jensen stepped out first, his hands already on his belt. He scanned the park, eyes zeroing in on Keanu like a heat-seeking missile. The irritation on his face was immediate. His jaw tensed as he muttered under his breath, "Another vagrant." He slammed the cruiser door without waiting for his partner. Rivera stepped out more slowly, taking a moment to stretch his back. His steps were steady, but there was a weariness to him, the kind built over years of seeing too much and changing too little. He didn't speak as he followed Jensen across the path toward the bench. Jensen led the way with purpose. He wasn't in a talking mood. He tapped his baton against his thigh, not in threat, but with the nervous rhythm of a man already annoyed before the conversation began. "You again," he said sharply as they closed the distance. "Didn't we already have this conversation?" Keanu didn't react to the tone. He looked up slowly, his eyes calm. He gave a faint nod, acknowledging them without fear or disrespect. "Just resting," he said. "Same as earlier." "Same?" Jensen echoed, his voice rising slightly. "That was a courtesy visit. This time, I'm not asking. You can't just set up camp here, man. This isn't your front porch." "I'm not camping," Keanu said, his voice low but clear. "I'm sitting." "You're loitering." "I'm sitting," he repeated. Rivera stood to the side, arms crossed, watching the exchange with a neutral expression. He hadn't said a word yet. His eyes moved between his partner and the man on the bench, measuring each one carefully. Jensen stepped closer, the baton now resting against his palm. He wasn't holding it in threat, but the gesture said enough. His eyes locked on Keanu's backpack. "What's in the bag?" Keanu didn't flinch. "Sandwich, a book, a water bottle. You want to look?" Jensen didn't answer. Instead, he shook his head with a scoff and turned slightly toward Rivera. "We need to get this guy moving." Rivera finally spoke, his tone slower, less aggressive. "He's not doing anything illegal," he said. "Might be better to just ask for ID and keep moving." Jensen grunted but didn't argue. He turned back to Keanu. "Let's see some ID." Keanu reached inside his coat, the motion deliberate and calm. He pulled out the same battered ID Jonathan M. Reed and handed it over. Jensen looked at it, suspicious. The photo matched, more or less, though the face on the card was cleaner, younger. He passed it to Rivera, who studied it longer. After a moment, Rivera gave a small nod. "Looks clean." But Jensen still didn't like it. Jensen stared at the ID a second longer, his lips pressed into a thin, hard line. Something about this man rubbed him the wrong way. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. Maybe it was how calm he was, how he didn't flinch. Most guys in his position would have been nervous, scrambling to explain themselves. But this guy? He just sat there like nothing could touch him. Jensen handed the ID back without a word, but the gesture was stiff, reluctant. Keanu took it gently and slid it back into his coat. "See?" he said. "Just a guy sitting on a bench. No crime in that." "Yeah, well, we'll be the judge of that," Jensen muttered. Rivera exhaled through his nose. He'd seen this before, his partner getting wound up over something that wasn't there. He took a step closer and spoke with more patience than authority. "Look," Rivera said, "you're not technically doing anything wrong, but people don't usually hang out here all day. We've had complaints before. That's why we check in." Keanu nodded. "I understand. Do you have somewhere you can go?" Rivera asked. "A shelter, maybe?" Keanu's answer was simple. "Prefer the fresh air." Jensen scoffed. "Yeah, well, the neighbors prefer not seeing this place turn into a damn sidewalk motel. You can take your fresh air somewhere else." Rivera shot his partner a look but said nothing. He was tired. This wasn't worth a fight. Keanu didn't react to the insult. He didn't look away either. He just sat there, still holding his cup, his backpack resting quietly at his feet. "I'm not looking for trouble," Keanu said. "You sure got a funny way of showing it," Jensen snapped. Rivera sighed. "Let's move on. We've got other calls pending. Jensen hesitated. He didn't want to leave. Not yet. Something about this guy felt off. But Rivera was already turning back toward the cruiser. Jensen lingered one more second. Then he pointed at Keanu. "You don't want to be here when we come back," he warned. "Next time won't be this friendly." Keanu didn't blink. Understood. Jensen didn't like that answer either. But he turned and followed Rivera back to the car. The doors slammed shut again, and the cruiser pulled away, kicking up a light spray of gravel as it drove out of the park entrance. Keanu watched them go. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. Instead, he slowly brought the paper cup to his lips and took a measured sip, letting the lukewarm coffee settle across his tongue. Around him, the park returned to stillness. The hidden camera beneath the bench continued recording. And in a small apartment a few blocks away, a monitor flickered silently as a member of Keanu's team leaned forward and whispered, "We've got something." Keanu set the paper cup down beside him and adjusted the strap on his backpack. The silence around him returned like a soft tide. Leaves rustled gently above his head, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once before its owner called it to heel. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head slightly lowered, not in defeat, but in thought. He had expected tension, but Jensen's anger was more than just protocol, it was personal. That part intrigued him. It wasn't just about enforcing rules, it was about asserting control, about reminding someone who looked like nothing that he could be pushed, intimidated, removed. But Keanu wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small notebook. Its cover was soft, worn from time and handling. He flipped it open and quietly jotted a few words on the next blank page. Day 1, Officer Jensen. Escalating, confrontational. Rivera, cautious. Tone, paternal. ID checked. No citation. Warning issued. Tension level, moderate. He paused for a moment, then added, noticed, but not yet seen. He closed the notebook and slipped it back into the side pocket of the bag. Then he leaned back, tilting his head to the sky just enough to let the soft light warm the bridge of his nose. It was getting brighter now. The sun had finally broken through the clouds. And with it, the first wave of foot traffic began to pass through the park dog walkers. A man with a stroller, a woman in business attire, jogging lightly, clutching a phone in one hand. Most passed him by without a glance, but a few did look. And just as quickly, they looked away. He didn't blame them. Not yet. That was part of the reason he was here. To understand the reflex, to look through people who didn't fit the setting, to feel what it was like to be invisible in plain sight. And today was only the beginning. The coffee was cold now. He didn't mind. He picked up the cup, stood slowly, stretched his arms overhead, and let out a slow breath. Then he walked 20 yards to the nearest trash can and dropped the cup inside. On the way back to the bench, he nodded politely at an elderly man who was feeding pigeons nearby. The man ignored him. Keanu returned to the bench and sat again. Across the street, behind tinted windows, the backup team remained silent, watching, recording. The real test wasn't just whether the police would return. It was how they'd act the next time, now that they were suspicious. Because when people feel their control slipping, that's when you see their true face. And the camera beneath the bench was still rolling. Keanu stayed motionless on the bench, back straight, eyes calm, chin tucked behind the collar of his coat. Time passed slowly in the park. He had learned, over the past week of dry runs and solo stakeouts, that silence could reveal more about people than words ever could. It was mid-morning now. The sunlight cut longer shadows between the trees. Footsteps crunched along the path, steady, rhythmic, deliberate. Two joggers came into view. Both looked to be in their late 50s, dressed in matching athletic gear, earbuds tucked into their collars. Their shoes were spotless, their pace measured. They weren't running for fitness. They were moving with purpose, almost like they were inspecting something. The woman saw Keanu first. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes narrowed, and the grimace formed without hesitation. Not a look of concern, one of contempt. The man followed her gaze, slowing just a step behind her. He gave Keanu a once-over, a sweep from head to toe that didn't linger on any single detail. because he already thought he understood the whole picture. "This park used to be beautiful," the man muttered. Keanu didn't look up. The woman adjusted her armband and leaned in. "Should we call someone?" "Yeah," the man replied, pulling out his phone. "I'll call non-emergency. It's better than letting this kind of thing spread." Keanu heard every word. He kept his eyes on the worn leather of his boots. One lace was fraying badly. He gently nudged it back into place with his thumb. The man's voice lowered, but it carried. "Yes, hi. There's a man disheveled, possibly unstable, sitting on a park bench near the North Trail. No, he hasn't said anything, but it's uncomfortable. Just thought you should know." Keanu made no movement. He could hear the tapping as the call ended. "Unbelievable," the woman muttered. "They let anyone just sit wherever now." They walked on. Their footsteps faded slowly. Keanu let out a breath. Not heavy, not angry, just full. He reached for the notebook again. Same one. He flipped to a new page. 10:17 a.m. Joggers. Well-dressed. Approx. Late 50 seconds. Verbal discomfort expressed. Non-emergency line called. Complaint filed with no incident or provocation. Tone. Entitlement masked as concern. He paused, then added, labeled as dangerous for doing nothing. He put the notebook away and leaned back. He wasn't surprised, not even disappointed. It was what he had expected and what he had come here to see for himself. People feared what they didn't want to understand. And sometimes, the people with the cleanest shoes were the ones quickest to dirty the truth. Across the field, a squirrel darted up a tree. Keanu kept still and waited. Because if he knew anything about the way systems worked, that phone call would bring someone back. 15 minutes passed before the patrol car returned. It wasn't the same slow roll as before. This time, the cruiser came in faster, tires crunching over the gravel with a sharper turn as it pulled into the park's entrance. Keanu saw it coming before he heard it, just the brief flash of sunlight glinting off the windshield through the trees. He didn't move. He let his posture remain the same. Still, ordinary. Exactly as he had been before. The car came to a stop closer to the bench this time. Doors opened. Same officers. Jensen was already frustrated before he even stepped onto the path. Rivera followed, slower, glancing down at his watch and muttering something under his breath. Jensen's hand hovered just above the holster at his side, not aggressive, but reactive. A silent signal of mistrust. "You again," Jensen said, stopping a few feet from the bench. "Didn't think we'd have to come back so soon." Keanu met his eyes, unfazed. "I haven't moved." "Yeah," Jensen said, stepping forward. "That's the problem." Rivera stayed back this time. He looked tired, like he didn't want to be part of this, but he was here anyway. Jensen motioned to the bench. "We got a call. Someone said you were making people uncomfortable." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "By sitting?" "You were being watched," Jensen snapped. "They didn't feel safe." Keanu tilted his head. "Did I speak to them? Threaten them? Block their path?" "No, but then what exactly was unsafe?" Rivera interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "Look, we're just responding to a complaint. It's protocol." Keanu nodded slowly, not to agree, but to acknowledge. "Understood." Jensen frowned. He didn't like how calm the man was. Not now, not earlier. There was something too collected about him. Most people in his position would have already left or become defensive, but this guy? He just sat there like he had nothing to fear. "You've been here a while," Jensen said, his tone tightening. "We need to know what your intentions are." Keanu looked at him steadily. "I don't have intentions. I have a bench." Rivera rubbed the back of his neck, glancing around the park. A mother pushed a stroller past the far trail. A jogger with a golden retriever looped around the east path. No one was looking. No one seemed concerned except the people who had called. "You planning to stay here all day?" Jensen asked, folding his arms across his chest. "I'm planning to sit until I feel like walking," Keanu said. The honesty of the answer threw them both off balance for a second. "You think you're funny?" Jensen barked. Keanu didn't smile. "Number." There was no challenge in his voice, just stillness. Rivera finally stepped forward. "Look, man, maybe you should move on, just to keep the peace. That's all we're asking." Keanu nodded again. I hear you. But he didn't move. Rivera sighed. Jensen narrowed his eyes. The tension lingered unspoken, unresolved, and it was far from over. Jensen stepped closer, his boots grinding into the gravel as he planted himself firmly in front of the bench. His presence felt heavier this time, like he wanted the air between them to shrink until control returned to him. He pointed down at the ground beside Keanu's foot. What's in the bag? Keanu looked down at the faded gray backpack resting against the bench leg. He had kept it right where it had always been, in plain sight. Same as before, he said. A sandwich, a water bottle, a notebook. You don't have any weapons? No needles? Anything I should know about? Jensen pressed. Number. Mind if I take a look? Keanu paused. You don't have a warrant, he said. Jensen's expression darkened. I can get one, but you don't have one now, Keanu replied, voice calm, steady. And I've done nothing to justify a search. Rivera glanced at his partner and gave a slight shake of the head. He's right. Let's not go there. Jensen gritted his teeth but didn't argue. Instead, he turned away and paced in a tight circle, trying to bleed off his frustration. Keanu watched him, silent, unreadable. Jensen finally stopped and looked out across the park like he was expecting someone else to show up backup maybe, or just a reason to escalate. You've got people worried, Jensen said without turning around. Keanu lowered his gaze to the ground. A small feather had landed on the toe of his boot. He flicked it off gently. No one asked me anything, Keanu said. They just assumed. Jensen turned. That's because you don't belong here. Rivera stiffened at those words, shifting uncomfortably. Even he knew that line had crossed into dangerous territory. Keanu looked up. What makes you think that? Jensen didn't answer. Rivera spoke instead. Look, maybe just take a walk. Come back later. Avoid the hassle. I'm not looking for hassle, Keanu said. Just air, just quiet. Jensen stepped forward again, jaw tight. You're testing me, man. Keanu didn't blink. I'm not. But you're being tested, whether you know it or not. For a moment, silence clung to the space between them like static. Rivera checked his watch again. We've got other calls. Let's go. Jensen lingered a beat longer, then gave a warning glance down at Keanu's backpack. Don't be here when we come back. Without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked back to the cruiser. Rivera followed, shoulders sagging slightly. Keanu watched them go, then slowly leaned back on the bench again. He opened his notebook once more. 11:08 a.m. Return visit prompted by jogger complaint. Escalating pattern. Fixation developing. Rivera, compliant but uneasy. Refused unlawful search. Second warning issued. Rivera calm. Status. Unchanged. He closed the notebook, tucked it away, and folded his hands across his lap. Another test passed, and he knew there would be more. The sound of the cruiser returning wasn't subtle this time. It came faster. No hesitation. No slow roll along the gravel path. It pulled in with purpose. The tires didn't just crunch, they skidded lightly as the brakes hit harder than necessary. Keanu didn't move. He knew who it was before he even saw them. He had felt the rhythm of their tension building over the past hour. The joggers had planted the seed. The last visit had poured water on it. Now, Officer Jensen was coming back, and the frustration that had been simmering below the surface was ready to boil. The door slammed harder this time. Jensen was out before Rivera even unbuckled his seatbelt. His stride was tight, shoulders stiff, his hand already hovering near his belt. Again, not on the baton, not quite on the taser, but close enough to send a message. He walked directly toward Keanu, who sat just as before, same bench, same calm. You're testing my patience, Jensen said, the words hot and blunt. Keanu lifted his head. I'm still sitting where you left me. Yeah, and that's the problem. Rivera exited the vehicle more slowly. He closed the door gently, as if trying to balance the energy his partner had just thrown out like a weapon. He didn't say anything right away. He knew he needed to watch. Jensen stepped closer, his eyes darting down to the backpack resting neatly beside the bench. What are you doing here? He barked. Keanu replied without shifting. I told you. Just sitting. Eating my lunch. Jensen scoffed. Lunch, huh? He crouched quickly and grabbed the bag before Keanu could even reach for it. He didn't ask. He didn't explain. He just unzipped it and pulled it open like he had the right. Rivera's voice cut through the air, low but warning. Jensen. I'm checking for weapons, Jensen replied, not looking up. Inside the bag, he found exactly what Keanu said was there. A sandwich wrapped in wax paper, a plastic bottle of water, a well-worn paperback copy of Mice and Men with dog-eared pages and a folded receipt from a used bookstore tucked between chapter 11 and 12. No weapons, no drugs, no needles, no threat. Just food, water, words. Jensen looked inside the bag again, searching as if something illegal might appear just by his will alone. Rivera walked closer now. We're not here to harass people. Jensen stood slowly, his mouth tightening. He's up to something. You've checked him twice. He hasn't moved. He hasn't broken any laws, Rivera said. We're done. Keanu remained seated. He didn't flinch when his bag was grabbed. He didn't protest when it was opened. And he didn't gloat when they found nothing. He just Saturday, silent, solid. And when the bag was set back beside him, he picked up the sandwich and slowly peeled back the wax paper. Keanu took a small bite of his sandwich, chewing slowly as the tension thickened around him. Officer Jensen stood barely a foot away, arms crossed now, the corners of his mouth twitching with restrained agitation. It wasn't the sandwich that irritated him, it was everything else. The stillness, the refusal to be intimidated, the silence that didn't crack. Keanu swallowed and took another bite, unfazed. Jensen shifted his weight. You're deliberately provoking us. Keanu looked up. How? By sitting here like this, not leaving, making people nervous. Rivera stepped forward, his voice steady. Jensen, that's enough. No, it's not, Jensen said. This guy's playing some kind of game. You don't sit here for hours with no reason. You don't just read books and sip water like you own the place. Keanu set the sandwich down on the bench beside him, gently pressing the wax paper closed. Then he looked Jensen directly in the eyes. I didn't know being calm was a crime. Jensen laughed dryly, shaking his head. You think this is funny? I think it's sad, Keanu replied. That me sitting quietly bothers you more than it should. Rivera glanced at Keanu, then at his partner. We have nothing on him, he said plainly. He's clean. Let it go. But Jensen wasn't hearing him. His eyes locked on Keanu's again. People like you always think you're smarter than the system, he said. Keanu gave no response. You sit here and smile. You act like you're untouchable. I'm not smiling, Keanu said softly. That answer hung in the air. Jensen turned abruptly and walked a few paces away, hands on his hips, chest rising and falling faster now. Rivera took the opportunity to speak, his voice lower. You're not doing anything wrong, he said. But you should know, people have a habit of calling us for no reason. Some don't like the look of someone sitting alone. Keanu nodded once. I know. Rivera studied him. You're not what you seem. Neither is this city, Keanu answered. Jensen returned, more composed but still simmering. I don't care what you're trying to prove. You'd better be gone by the next round. Keanu picked up his sandwich and held it for a moment before taking another bite. I heard you the first time, he said. Rivera tapped Jensen lightly on the arm. Let's go. Enough for today. Jensen didn't move right away, but then he turned without another word and marched back toward the cruiser. Rivera followed, slower, casting one last glance back toward the man on the bench. Keanu watched them leave. No anger, no fear, just the same stillness. He reached into his coat and pulled out his notebook again. Keanu flipped the notebook open to a fresh page. The paper was slightly bent at the corners, the lines faded with use. He rested the pad on his knee and wrote slowly, deliberately, letting the quiet settle around him again as the sound of the cruiser faded down the hill. 12:42 p.m. Third contact. Visibly agitated, more aggressive. Bag searched without consent. Found nothing. Rivera cautioned restraint. Pattern emerging. Escalation not tied to behavior, but to presence. He paused, then underlined the next line twice. Being seen is mistaken for provocation. He clicked the pen closed and slipped both it and the notebook back into the side pocket of the bag. The sandwich was nearly finished now. He took another bite, chewing with care. Not because he was hungry, he wasn't, but because it was something to do, a rhythm to hold, a human act that required no permission and carried no threat. He brushed the crumbs from his lap and leaned back on the bench, letting his eyes wander across the park. A father was flying a kite with his daughter on the hill. A woman read a novel beneath a tree, her dog sleeping beside her. A few college students lounged on the grass with laptops open, earbuds in. None of them looked his way. And yet somehow, he was the one watched. He thought of Marvin again, the Navy veteran from downtown, the man who had lost everything and still offered half his sandwich to a stranger. Marvin had told him that the scariest part wasn't hunger or cold. It was being treated like you were already guilty of something. Like sitting still was suspicious. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in through his nose, out through his mouth. His heartbeat remained steady. He didn't need to fake calm. It had become real. But underneath it all, he knew this was far from over. He had seen it in Jensen's eyes. That look, that challenge, that unsettled belief that somehow Keanu was doing something wrong just by existing where he wasn't expected, and worse, that he refused to be rattled by authority. He reached into the bag once more and pulled out the paperback. He turned to the bookmarked page and began to read. The words blurred slightly, not because of emotion, but because he was listening. Listening for footsteps, voices, engines, any indication that the silence might once again be broken. But for now, the moment was his. He had chosen stillness as his form of resistance. And still, the camera rolled beneath the bench. Still, the stream ran quietly on encrypted servers. And still, Jensen's warning echoed in his mind. "You better be gone by the next round." Keanu had no intention of going anywhere. The air had turned warmer by early afternoon. The sun pressed down more directly now, casting sharp-edged shadows across the gravel paths and stone benches. Keanu had shifted positions only slightly, his legs stretched out, the book now resting beside him. He watched as more people filtered through the park picnics beginning, kids running between the trees, earbuds in ears, eyes down on phones. For a brief moment, it almost felt like any other day. Until he heard the spinning click of bicycle wheels. 3 teenagers rounded the corner from the far path, their laughter already loud before they reached the bench. They were high school age 14, maybe 15 at the oldest, 2 boys and 1 girl. The girl trailed slightly behind, half embarrassed, glancing nervously around. But the 2 boys were full of energy, feeding off each other like lightning, striking twice in the same spot. "Yo," one of them said, slowing his bike as he approached the bench. "Check out this guy. Looks like John Wick in retirement." The other boy laughed and immediately pulled out his phone, aiming it directly at Keanu. "Dude, don't," the girl said quietly, but they ignored her. Keanu didn't move. He kept his posture easy, back straight, hands resting in his lap. He didn't react. The first boy swerved closer. "Hey, you famous or just funky?" The second one laughed harder. "Get this. This is gold. Homeless Keanu right here. Say something for TikTok, man." The phone was held just inches from Keanu's face now. Still, he didn't react. The girl hovered near the path, clearly uncomfortable. She didn't speak again, but she didn't leave either. The boy with the phone leaned in farther, undeterred by the silence. "Come on, man. Say something crazy. You're a movie star, right? Or were." Finally, Keanu turned his head, eyes calm but steady. "You should move along," he said quietly. The first boy raised an eyebrow. "That a threat?" "It's a request," Keanu said. "You don't want to be remembered this way." The second boy chuckled and mimicked his voice in a mocking tone. "You don't want to be remembered this way," he repeated, laughing. "Chill, old man." And then the first one reached into the basket on his handlebars and pulled out a half-empty soda can. With a cocky smirk, he tossed it at Keanu's feet. It hit the ground and rolled slowly to a stop near his boot, fizzing slightly at the rim. The phone was still recording. Keanu looked down at the can, then back up at them. No anger, no fear, just silence. The boys laughed and high-fived. "You're lucky we're feeling nice today," one of them muttered as they pedaled away. The girl followed behind, her face turned down. None of the nearby adults stepped in. Not one passerby looked long enough to understand what was happening. Keanu bent down and picked up the can. Keanu turned the soda can slowly in his hand, wiping off a bit of dirt from the label. The drink had gone flat. Sticky residue clung to the seam of the metal where the fizz had leaked through the tab. He didn't say a word as he stood and walked to the nearest trash bin 10 yards away. Each step was measured, not slow, not rushed, just deliberate. He dropped the can in and brushed his hands against the sides of his coat. As he made his way back to the bench, he passed a man walking his dog who had seen the entire thing. Their eyes met briefly. The man looked away almost instantly, pretending to check his phone. Keanu said nothing. He didn't expect intervention, not anymore. This experiment had already revealed a truth louder than words. Most people didn't act when it didn't involve them. He sat down again, shoulders relaxed. His sandwich was still on the bench, but the appetite was gone. Instead, he reached for the notebook, the one constant companion in this quiet social storm. He flipped to a clean page and wrote slowly. 1:16 p.m. 3 teenagers. 2. Male, 1 female. Verbal mockery. Filming without consent. Physical provocation. Soda can thrown. No physical threat, but clear attempt at humiliation. No response from public. Pattern. Disrespect normalized when target is perceived as powerless. He paused for a moment, tapping the pen gently against the edge of the notebook. Then he added, "No apology, no awareness, no accountability." He closed the notebook and placed it in the bag again. The sun had shifted slightly, the light cutting across his face in angled streaks. A group of children played near the fountain now, laughing and running barefoot across the grass. Parents sat on picnic blankets, watching, talking, sipping coffee. None of them glanced his way. Behind the trees, about 30 yards off the main path, a woman sat with a small dog curled at her feet. She wore sunglasses, a hoodie, and carried a large camera case. To anyone else, she looked like a freelance nature photographer or a hobbyist taking weekend pictures. But beneath her coat, she was recording with a high-res shoulder rig. She was part of Keanu's team. She had captured the entire interaction with the teenagers from a perfect angle. She tapped once on her phone. Footage confirmed. Got everything. Clean audio. Across town, another team member monitoring the live stream from a secure location clipped the segment and timestamped it. The title was Clinical, Factual, Teenagers, Verbal Harassment, Divided by Public Indifference, 13/16 PST. They would archive it, catalog it, use it later. But Keanu, still seated on that bench, didn't think about the file or the footage. He thought about the girl who hadn't laughed, the only one who hadn't added her voice to the noise. And he wondered what she would carry home from this. Keanu leaned back against the bench. The wooden slats creaked softly beneath him. He looked up at the sky for a moment, clear blue, no clouds. In another life, he might have spent this kind of day riding through the canyons, windows down, feeling the wind. But here, in worn clothes and hidden behind a disguise, the world treated him like background noise. And that was the point. A gust of wind picked up a napkin from the sidewalk and sent it tumbling near his feet. He bent down, caught it before it blew farther, and tucked it under a nearby stone. Something about the act felt symbolic, even if no one saw it. Then a rustle in the bushes to his right. His teammate emerged briefly, just enough to signal with a subtle hand gesture everything was okay. She remained hidden otherwise. They had a system in place. No intervention unless necessary. Observe, record, protect if needed. Keanu glanced down at his hands. The dirt under his fingernails was intentional, but the ache in his knuckles was real. Hours of sitting still, tension riding in his back, every fiber of his body aware of the stares, the judgments, the mockery. A child's laugh broke the silence nearby. He looked up. The same girl from the teen group, The one who hadn't thrown anything or laughed was walking back across the grass, alone now. She looked nervous, glancing around as if unsure whether to continue. In her hand, a folded napkin. Keanu didn't move. She hesitated just a few feet away, then stepped closer and placed the napkin gently on the bench beside him. Before he could say a word, she turned and walked away, fast. He waited a beat, then unfolded the napkin. Inside was a single chocolate chip cookie, broken but still intact, and a note, written in quick, shaky handwriting. "I'm sorry for my friends. You didn't deserve that." That was it. Just a single sentence, but it landed harder than all the insults earlier. Keanu stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, he smiled. Not the smile of a movie star. Not the grin of someone who had won anything. It was small, quiet, sad, but real. He folded the note again, carefully, and placed it in his notebook between the pages he'd written earlier. He didn't eat the cookie. Instead, he put it back in the napkin and tucked it inside the front pocket of his jacket, a symbol of decency in a storm of mockery. Proof that even in a group, someone had the courage to break away. The afternoon light shifted again, and a soft breeze stirred the leaves above. Keanu sat still, watching the park around him return to normal. Children laughing, adults ignoring, teens gone. But something had changed, just a little, and that was enough to keep going. He reached for his coffee cup, took a sip, and began writing again. Keanu hadn't moved in nearly 45 minutes. The sandwich was long gone, the coffee cold, and the sun was starting to cast long shadows across the park. He remained seated, notebook open, pen resting gently against the page. The wind rustled the leaves in rhythmic bursts, as if nature itself was trying to whisper something he wasn't meant to miss. He sensed the shift in energy before he heard the footsteps. Boots on gravel, heavy, impatient, not like Rivera's slow, methodical approach. No small talk this time, no partner, just one set of footsteps marching straight toward him with force. Officer Jensen again. His jaw was clenched, face flushed. This wasn't the bored irritation of a cop doing rounds. This was something else, something personal. "You're still here," Jensen snapped as he came into view. Keanu looked up calmly, eyes soft but steady. "I am," he replied, voice level. Jensen didn't hide his anger. Three times I've told you to move." Keanu didn't raise his voice. "You said soon. I haven't broken any law." The officer stepped closer, closing the gap between them. "You're provoking people, making them uncomfortable, filming them maybe." Keanu didn't flinch. "I haven't touched my phone." "Then you're baiting reactions," Jensen growled. "Don't play smart with me. I know what you're doing." Keanu remained still. "I'm sitting in a public space, eating, writing, that's all." Jensen's hand moved to his belt, fingers brushing against his radio. "I could run you in for loitering," he said, almost like a dare. Keanu folded his notebook slowly, no sudden movements. "Is sitting in public now considered a threat?" Jensen's eyes twitched. Something in Keanu's calm unsettled him even more. It wasn't arrogance, it was patience. A kind of practiced stillness that made Jensen feel like he wasn't in control of the moment. Then, a familiar voice broke the tension. "Hey!" Officer Rivera appeared at the edge of the path, walking up briskly, eyes flicking between the two men. He didn't even ask for context. He'd seen enough from a distance. "What's going on here?" Rivera asked, tone firm but restrained. Jensen turned. "He's still here, still loitering. He's obviously..." Rivera held up a hand. "We've already been through this. He's up to something," Jensen insisted. Rivera glanced at Keanu, then back at his partner. "He's eating, writing. No complaints filed. You said it yourself." His ID checked out. Jensen hesitated, then pulled out his radio. "I want dispatch to run that ID again. Something's off." Rivera exhaled slowly. "You're pushing it, man." Keanu said nothing. He reached for his water bottle and unscrewed the cap like they weren't arguing over his very presence. The radio crackled to life. "Negative on file," the voice from dispatch said. "No record under that name or ID number." Jensen's jaw tightened. Rivera raised an eyebrow. That's strange. It showed up before. Jensen looked back at Keanu, suspicion blazing. I told you. He's planning something. Keanu didn't flinch. He took a sip from his water bottle and then placed it down beside him gently. His notebook rested on his lap, untouched, but he made no move to hide it or shield its contents. Is it a crime, he said calmly, for someone to have no digital record? Rivera stepped slightly in front of Jensen, not aggressively, but with just enough presence to draw a line between the two men. Sir, Rivera said, glancing over his shoulder at his partner, we're not going to escalate this. Jensen scoffed. Escalate? He's refusing to identify himself now. Keanu shook his head slowly. You already ran my ID. It worked earlier, didn't it? That's what's bothering me, Jensen snapped, gesturing toward his radio. It did work. Now it doesn't. Who are you? Keanu tilted his head slightly. Would you be treating me this way if I were in a suit or pulling up in a car you recognized? Rivera looked uncomfortable. Jensen looked furious. This isn't about how you're dressed, Jensen replied. It's about how you're hiding something. I'm not hiding, Keanu said softly. I'm just here. The words floated out between them, too simple to argue against, too grounded to ignore. A jogger passed by and glanced awkwardly at the confrontation, but didn't stop. A woman on a bench nearby got up and moved away with a nervous glance. A child holding a balloon stared until her mother tugged her gently by the hand and whispered something in her ear. Jensen's face twisted. He wasn't used to this. Not being obeyed, not being watched by others, and still feeling powerless. Let's go, he said to Rivera. We take him in. Let the station sort it out. Rivera didn't move. We've got nothing, Rivera replied quietly. And this isn't sitting right. What's not sitting right? Jensen barked. He's clearly testing us. Probably has someone filming it right now. Rivera lowered his voice further. And if that's true, the last thing you want to do is give them the footage they're hoping for. That hit Jensen like a slap. He scanned the trees, the benches, the bushes. Paranoia flickered in his eyes. Keanu just looked down again. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He wrote something small in his notebook, then closed it once more. Jensen stepped back, not because he wanted to, but because Rivera hadn't backed him up. I'll remember your face, he muttered. Keanu looked up, eyes steady. I hope you remember more than that. Rivera tapped Jensen lightly on the arm. Come on. Jensen walked away, jaw tight, fists clenched. Rivera followed, but he paused once just for a second and looked back at Keanu. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Not recognition, not apology, curiosity, and maybe, just maybe, a little doubt. As the two officers walked away, Keanu slowly exhaled. His shoulders remained steady, but inside, he could feel the tension coiled tight, less from fear and more from the weight of what he was learning. Every encounter was building a mosaic of quiet truths about how the world treated the unseen. A gentle breeze rolled through the park, rustling leaves overhead. The sun dipped slightly lower, casting long shadows across the cracked path. Keanu reached into the brown paper bag beside him and pulled out a sandwich, unwrapping it carefully. He wasn't particularly hungry, but he knew he had to maintain the illusion. It wasn't just a disguise, it was a discipline. From across the park, a young woman with headphones glanced toward him, then quickly looked away. She clutched her tote bag closer and crossed to the other side of the path. Her reaction wasn't malicious, it was instinctive, conditioned, as if proximity to someone who looked like him meant she was somehow in danger. Keanu took another bite of the sandwich, chewing slowly. The flavors were bland, but the experience was sharp. He scribbled another note in his journal. Fear isn't always loud. Sometimes it just crosses the street. Behind the hedges, a faint lens glinted. One of Keanu's team, disguised as a birdwatcher, adjusted their camera and refocused. They hadn't missed a second of the police exchange. Every angle was covered, not for vengeance, for evidence, for truth. From the playground nearby, a ball bounced toward Keanu's bench. A little boy, no more than 6, came jogging after it. He froze when he saw Keanu, eyes wide, body tensing in hesitation. Keanu gently picked up the ball and held it out with both hands, open, non-threatening. The boy looked back at his mother, who sat on a bench, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up, alarmed, and called out, "Jack, come back here, now!" The boy hesitated, then took a few steps forward and retrieved the ball from Keanu's hands without a word. Their eyes met for half a second, then the boy turned and ran back. His mother immediately ushered him away, glaring back over her shoulder as if Keanu had committed some invisible crime. He stared at the empty space where they had stood. Then, slowly, he leaned back against the bench, hands resting on his lap. In his notebook, he wrote, "Even kindness is suspect when worn in rags. His disguise may have hidden his fame, but it couldn't hide his humanity. And apparently, it couldn't hide the fear he evoked just by being still, by existing where people thought he didn't belong." Keanu glanced toward the sky, where the fading light caught the silhouette of 2 hawks circling overhead. Then he closed the notebook, folded his hands, and waited. He knew they would come again. But next time, something would shift, and not just for him. The wind shifted as dusk crept over the city. Keanu stepped off the main trail, shoes crunching lightly on the gravel, and disappeared into the narrow service alley behind the maintenance shed. It was quiet back there, just the soft hum of a distant traffic light and the faint screech of subway brakes far below the park. A tall figure leaned against the brick wall, hoodie pulled low, a messenger bag slung diagonally across his chest. His name was Eli, mid-30s, soft-spoken, and brilliant. Once a freelance coder, now one of Keanu's most trusted collaborators. "You're late," Eli said with a small grin. Keanu gave a quiet shrug. Had to wait for the hawks to finish circling. Eli unzipped his bag and pulled out a compact tablet, already blinking with activity. As the screen lit up, it revealed a grid of video clips, each labeled with timestamps and officer names. They had been collecting data for days, but today's encounters, especially with Officer Jensen, had changed the tone. "They're escalating," Keanu said, voice low but steady. "It's time." Eli nodded. "You want to go wide?" "Not yet," Keanu replied. "Not until we're sure we're showing the full pattern. The goal isn't outrage, it's truth. We're not here to destroy lives. We're here to reveal something real." Eli tapped the screen, enlarging one of the most recent clips. It showed Jensen snatching Keanu's paper bag, rifling through it without cause, and glaring, as if the contents were some kind of threat. A sandwich, a book, a bottle of water. Keanu leaned in slightly. "Slow that one down." Eli scrubbed through the footage. The moment Rivera tried to intervene, hands up. Trying to calm his partner played in slow motion. The body language said everything. Rivera had known it was wrong, but Jensen had pressed forward anyway, carried by some need to prove control. Keanu's gaze was calm but thoughtful. "We need both angles. Did Marta get that wide shot?" "She did, from the west hedge, and audio. Clear. You can hear him mutter. He's up to something, even after Rivera tells him to let it go." Keanu nodded slowly, then looked out toward the edge of the alley, where the park lights were just beginning to flicker on. "They're not going to stop," he said. Eli hesitated. "So what's next?" Keanu adjusted the collar of his jacket and straightened. "We keep sitting, we keep filming, and when it becomes undeniable, we show them what they've looked past." Eli offered the small lapel mic. Keanu took it without a word, clipping it inside his shirt, behind a sewn-in crease that made it nearly invisible. "You sure you're ready for whatever happens next?" Keanu gave a quiet smile. "That's the thing about silence. If you listen long enough, it starts to echo." He turned and walked back toward the path, back to the bench, back to invisibility. But this time, he was wired. And this time, the world would be watching. Keanu returned to the same wooden bench as the city lights began to glow faintly through the rising dusk. The crowd had thinned. The mothers and toddlers were gone. The dog walkers had shifted to quieter routes. The few people who remained stayed at a distance, some with eyes that lingered, others avoiding him altogether. He sat down slowly, placing the same worn paper bag beside him on the bench. Inside it were the same items: his paperback novel, a turkey sandwich wrapped in foil, and a bottle of spring water. The only new addition was the tiny microphone sewn into the lining of his collar. It picked up every breath, every word, every footstep around him. He opened the book to the same page he'd been pretending to read for 3 days straight. The spine was cracked from years of use, but the story had never really mattered. What mattered was what the world did around him while he remained still. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. A silent ping from Marta. Mic live. Camera 3 rolling. A second buzz followed. Wide angle in place. Eli's monitoring audio remotely. Keanu didn't respond. He didn't need to. Everything was already in motion. He looked up briefly as a jogger passed by. Earbuds in, face tight with judgment. No words this time. Just a slight shake of the head and a long glance backward. Keanu lowered his eyes again. From the bushes behind the benches, a tiny red light blinked once, then went dark. Confirmation that the hidden camera was recording. Keanu breathed evenly. His mind ran through the last few days. The assumptions, the disrespect, the soda can thrown by the teens, the silence from passers-by, and most of all, the behavior of those in uniform. He knew this wasn't about him. That was the point. He had crafted this entire scenario to see what the world looked like when it thought no one important was watching. A police cruiser crept into view on the far side of the park's loop. Keanu didn't flinch. He turned a page in his book. He didn't read it. A young man sat 2 benches away, scrolling his phone. His earbuds blocked out everything. A woman approached from the far end of the trail, pushing a stroller, then turned around before she reached Keanu's side of the path. The cruiser paused, then kept going. No Jensen, not yet. Keanu's fingers moved slightly. He pulled a small notepad from his pocket and jotted a few lines. Stroller mom turned back again. 3rd time. Jogger slowed, stared. No words, just distance. No interaction needed, fear does enough. He closed the notebook and looked up at the moon, pale and rising. Then his phone buzzed again. Jensen's back, on foot, coming from east entrance. Keanu didn't move. He simply turned the page of his book and waited. The footsteps were unmistakable, heavy, deliberate, not rushed, but not casual either. Keanu didn't need to look. He recognized Officer Jensen's rhythm now. It had become as familiar as the rustle of trees in the park or the whistle of the wind through the playground fence. Jensen stopped a few feet behind the bench. "You again," he muttered. Keanu turned a page in his book. Jensen stepped closer. "You know, people are starting to complain. They say you're making them uncomfortable." Keanu glanced up slowly. "I'm just sitting here." Jensen's jaw tightened. "That's not how this works. You don't get to make people feel unsafe just because you want to prove some quiet little point." Keanu didn't answer. The silence stretched. Only the distant honk of a car and the soft hum of cicadas filled the gap. Jensen's voice dropped lower. "I don't know who you are, but you're not just some drifter with a sandwich and a paperback. I've been watching you." Keanu met his gaze, calm, unblinking. "Then you know I've broken no laws," Jensen snorted. "You're provoking reactions. That's intent. That's disorderly conduct if I decided island." "Then arrest me," Keanu said, folding the page of his book neatly. Jensen hesitated. Dispatch crackled faintly from his radio. A moment later, another officer appeared at the edge of the path. Rivera. "Jensen," Rivera called firmly. "Step back." Jensen turned slightly, clearly annoyed. "He's baiting us." Rivera walked over, gaze even, hands on his belt. "He's sitting. That's not a crime." Jensen looked like he wanted to protest. Instead, he reached for his radio. "Dispatch, run that ID again. Anderson. Caleb. Static." Then a pause. "No record found under that alias," came the reply. Keanu remained still. Rivera tilted his head. "You ran that yesterday, and the day before," Jensen added, voice rising. "No history, no address, no priors, no nothing." "Which means what?" Rivera asked, crossing his arms. Jensen stared at Keanu like he was solving a puzzle he didn't like the answer to. It means he's hiding something. Keanu slowly stood from the bench. Or maybe it means I just wanted to see the world from a different angle. Rivera glanced between them. We've got nothing on him. Let it go. Jensen looked ready to explode. He's planning something. Keanu picked up his bag and slung it over his shoulder. He turned slightly toward Rivera. I'll be here tomorrow. Then he walked away, leaving Jensen behind in the gathering dark. As Keanu disappeared down the path, Rivera remained behind. He stared at his partner for a long moment. Sometimes people just want to be left alone, he said quietly. Not everyone's a threat. Jensen didn't reply. Somewhere in the bushes, the hidden red light blinked again. The footage was still rolling, and everything was being recorded. The sun was starting to dip lower, casting a golden wash over the park. Long shadows stretched across the cracked concrete, and a cool breeze carried with it the soft scent of jasmine from a nearby bush. Keanu sat exactly where he had for the past several days on the same worn bench, his paperback open but untouched in his lap. The sandwich bag beside him was still sealed, the water bottle barely unscrewed. He wasn't here to eat. Not today. From the far end of the walkway, rapid footsteps approached. He didn't turn to look. He didn't need to. The rhythm of those boots, sharp and angry, echoed louder than the rustling leaves. Officer Jensen was back, but this time, something was different. Jensen's face was flushed with frustration, sweat glistening beneath the rim of his cap. His posture was no longer guarded professionalism. It was pure aggression. He stormed up to the bench, eyes locked on Keanu, with a look that bordered on desperation. I want the truth, he barked, voice cracking slightly at the edge. What's your real name? Keanu looked up slowly, calm and unflinching. I already gave it to you. Jensen's lips curled as if the words stung more than they should have. He stepped in closer, towering over Keanu, breathing heavily. No, you didn't. You gave me a ghost. There's no Caleb Anderson. No record. No fingerprint match. Nothing. Keanu didn't answer. I've worked this beat for 9 years, Jensen continued, almost talking to himself now. I know everyone. I've seen every trick, every scam. But you're different. You sit here like you're just passing time, but you're always watching, always writing in that little notebook like you're above it all. Still, Keanu remained silent. That silence was gasoline on Jensen's fire. In one violent motion, Jensen lunged forward and grabbed Keanu by the front of his shirt, yanking him to his feet. What's your game? He shouted. You filming us? You baiting us? Is this some social experiment for your Hollywood friends? A few heads turned from across the park. A mother walking her child slowed. A jogger came to a stop near a tree. Phones were already outraised, recording. Keanu didn't resist. He simply looked Jensen in the eye and said softly, "Let go." That's when Rivera appeared. He moved quickly from the curb, having parked in a hurry when he saw the altercation from across the street. His voice rang out sharp and authoritative. Jensen, that's enough. Jensen froze, caught in the middle of a storm of his own making. His grip on Keanu's shirt didn't loosen right away. Rivera stepped between them and shoved Jensen back with both hands. What are you doing? Jensen's chest heaved. He's playing us, Rivera. Don't you see it? He's a plant or a trap or something. He's got us dancing like fools, and I'm done with it. Rivera looked around. The bystanders were multiplying. Cameras were definitely rolling now. This wasn't just another tense moment. This was a career-ending one. Let it go, Rivera said firmly. This could get us both fired. Jensen's eyes twitched, and for a moment, it looked like he might do something worse, something reckless. But Keanu stepped back calmly and sat down on the bench again. His shirt was rumpled, but his face showed no fear, only sorrow. The tension hung like smoke in the air. Officer Jensen's hands were clenched into fists at his sides, knuckles white with pressure. Rivera glanced at the crowd forming behind him, teenagers, parents, dog walkers, none of them moving, all of them watching, filming, judging. Jensen, Rivera said again, quieter this time. You need to walk away." But Jensen wasn't hearing him anymore. His eyes were fixed on Keanu, who sat on the bench like a statue, completely composed. Not defiant, not smug, just still, as if waiting. "I've given everything to this job," Jensen muttered, half to himself. "Nights, weekends, my marriage, and this guy. He just shows up and turns the world against me." He took a step forward again, and Rivera blocked him with his arm. "Think about what you're saying," Rivera warned. "You're not mad at him. You're mad at what you see when you look at him. The doubt, the fear, the truth." Jensen shook his head. "Don't psychoanalyze me, Rivera. That man is a lie. You think he's just some harmless guy on a bench? Look closer. He's watching, collecting. He's got mics, footage, probably a whole crew hiding in the trees." "You sound paranoid." Jensen snapped his head toward his partner. "Because I am. Because I know what this is. It's a test. It's entrapment. And we failed." That last sentence landed hard. Rivera didn't respond right away. Because deep down, he knew Jensen wasn't entirely wrong. They had failed, maybe not in action, but in intention, in dignity, in grace. From the bench, Keanu spoke again, his voice calm and clear. "I didn't come here to hurt anyone." Jensen turned to him. "Then why are you still here?" Keanu met his eyes. "Because the world doesn't change unless someone's willing to sit still and let it reveal itself." Silence. Even the nearby birds seemed to pause their song. Rivera blinked, trying to process what he'd just heard. Jensen, on the other hand, looked like he'd been slapped. "I don't buy that poetic crap," Jensen spat. "You think you're noble, sitting here watching the ants scramble. But what gives you the right?" Keanu didn't flinch. "No one gave me the right, but everyone has the responsibility." Rivera's radio crackled, snapping them all back to the moment. A request for backup somewhere downtown. He ignored it. The phones were still recording. People hadn't put them down. Rivera stepped back and spoke firmly. "This ends here. Jensen, take a walk. And if I don't, I'll report you myself." Jensen looked like a balloon ready to burst, but something in him finally cracked. Not the angry part, the exhausted part. The part that had been holding on too long. He stepped away, muttered something under his breath, and walked toward the patrol car without another word. Rivera turned to Keanu, almost apologetically. But Keanu just nodded once, and then, once again, he returned to stillness. Keanu sat motionless on the bench as Officer Rivera turned to follow Jensen's retreating figure. But then, with no drama, no shift in tone or posture, Keanu reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a small black phone. He held it low in his hand, not flaunting, not theatrical, just deliberate. He tapped the screen. The interface lit up instantly. A quiet chime echoed from the speaker. Notifications streamed across the top. Hearts, comments, emojis, and usernames pouring in by the second. One line stood out in glowing text just below the stream window. "Live, 1.2 meters. Viewers watching now." Keanu didn't raise his voice. He simply said, in that grounded, unmistakable tone, "It's time." Rivera turned, confused. Time for what? Keanu angled the screen just slightly, revealing the real-time video feed. A few seconds behind, the stream was capturing everything: Jensen's outburst, the bystanders' phones, Rivera's own words trying to stop it. Keanu looked up at Rivera, his eyes steady. "Everything's been live." Rivera's eyebrows shot up. "You're streaming this?" Keanu nodded. "Every second since I first sat down. From the moment Jensen asked me for ID, from the kids with the soda, from the old woman no one helped. It's all out there." A sudden gasp came from behind them. One of the onlookers had recognized him. "Wait, oh my God, that's Keanu Reeves." Rivera's mouth parted slightly. "You're Keanu Reeves?" The question hung in the air. Keanu looked at him calmly. "Yes, you've been here this whole time, pretending to be homeless?" "Not pretending," Keanu corrected softly. "Just sitting still, letting the world speak for itself." The silence grew louder. Jensen had stopped walking. He turned back, His eyes met the screen in Keanu's hand, and he saw the truth. His face, his rage, his hands grabbing Keanu's collar, the fear in his own eyes. "You streamed this?" he said, voice brittle. "You streamed me?" Keanu met his gaze evenly. "I streamed everything." Jensen looked sick. He blinked, as if trying to undo the last hour with sheer willpower. His voice cracked. "You tricked me. You set me up." "No," Keanu said, rising slowly to his feet. "I didn't trick anyone. I just Saturday. You did the rest." He stepped forward, not threatening, but not backing down. Rivera stepped aside, letting Keanu pass. The phone was still live. The comment feed was now a blur, messages flying in every second. "This is unbelievable. I'm crying right now. Why is no one helping him? That officer should be fired. Keanu is the realest human being alive." Keanu looked directly at Jensen and said quietly, "This wasn't a test." Jensen swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. "Then what was it?" "A mirror," Keanu replied. He turned the phone slightly so Jensen could see his own reflection in the screen, hollow eyes, flushed face, the face of a man unraveling. Jensen backed up a step. Keanu didn't follow. He simply said, "You can blame me, or you can see what you've become." Rivera stood frozen beside him, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders like lead. He looked from Keanu to Jensen, and then back again. All the noise of the city, the honking cars, the buzz of phones, even the murmuring crowd around them, it all faded as Rivera quietly asked, "Why?" Keanu turned to him. "Because I needed people to see, not the headlines, not the Hollywood stories. I needed them to see what people walk past every day and pretend not to notice." Rivera nodded slowly, his face shifting from shock to something deeper. Understanding. Jensen, however, wasn't ready. He clenched his fists. "You think you can just walk into our world and humiliate us? You think you're better than the badge?" Keanu's gaze didn't flinch. "No, officer. I think the badge is better than how it's being worn." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jensen's face twisted with fury. But he had nothing left to swing with. No words that could undo what had already been broadcast. His hands dropped to his sides as the weight of public exposure pressed in on him. Someone from the crowd yelled, "He should be suspended." Another voice followed. Keanu did what no one else could. A woman stepped forward with a tissue in her hand, eyes red from crying. "I watched you all week," she said to Keanu. "I thought you were just some poor man. I wanted to help. I didn't. I'm sorry." Keanu shook his head gently. "You were watching. That's more than most." Rivera turned to Jensen. "You need to step back. Right now." Jensen hesitated, then stormed off toward his cruiser, slamming the door behind him. The engine roared, but the car didn't move. He just sat there, staring through the windshield, pale and defeated. Keanu tucked the phone back into his coat. Rivera exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You've got the world watching, man." Keanu gave a tired smile. "Not watching me. Watching themselves." He looked out over the park. The same park where he'd been overlooked, insulted, ignored. The same bench where he'd spent hours sitting, absorbing every reaction, every passing glance. This place had become more than just a location. It had become a reflection. One of Keanu's hidden camera crew, a woman with short hair and a neutral hoodie, stepped out from the shadows. She gave a small nod. "The footage is secure," she said softly. "Backup copies uploaded. Everything's covered." Rivera stared at her, then at Keanu. "You had a team the whole time?" Keanu nodded. "We don't do this alone." Rivera looked down, then gave a small chuckle. "Guess I should have known." "You didn't flinch once." "No need to," Keanu replied. "Truth doesn't flinch." Another notification popped up on the crew member's device. The live stream viewership had climbed past 2 million. As Rivera stepped closer, his voice dropped. "You planning to go public with your identity officially?" Keanu didn't answer right away. Then he said, "It's not about my name, it's about the story." And with that, he returned to the bench. Quiet again, still again. But now the whole world was finally looking. It started slowly. A few curious onlookers lingered near the edges of the park, their eyes darting from phone screens to the bench where Keanu still Saturday. Then, within minutes, a ripple of energy spread through the air like static. Word had gotten out. Someone had posted his location in the comments during the live stream, and now people were arriving not just to see the man himself, but to understand what they'd just witnessed online. The soft hum of engines grew louder. News vans began pulling up along the curb, one after another. Reporters in blazers and jeans hopped out with cameras already rolling, crew members rushing to connect cords, raise antennas, and point lenses directly at the quiet man on the bench. Boom mics hovered like vultures. Keanu didn't move. He stayed still, eyes forward, as if the bench beneath him had rooted him to the earth. His face didn't ask for attention. His posture didn't invite questions, but his silence screamed louder than any press conference. A journalist shouted, "Keanu, is it true you've been here all week undercover?" Another asked, "Were you trying to expose misconduct? Was this a planned sting?" Keanu didn't answer. Instead, the cameras shifted toward Rivera, who stood nearby, suddenly looking much smaller in the wake of media chaos. Flashbulbs popped, mics were shoved toward his chest. "Officer, is it true your department ignored protocol?" Rivera raised both hands, his voice steady but careful. "I can't comment on anything under investigation. But yes, I was here. I saw things I'll be reporting up the chain." Someone shouted, "Where's the other officer? Where's Jensen?" Eyes turned toward the street. Jensen's cruiser remained parked under the tree, but he was no longer inside. He stood stiffly on the sidewalk, his face flushed, watching the crowd swarm around Keanu. Reporters made their way to him, and the moment they reached him, the mask cracked. "I did my job," Jensen barked, defensive. That man refused to identify himself. He was loitering. This isn't Hollywood. One of the cameras caught every word. Another mic picked up a bystander's reply. "But you grabbed him. You went too far." Jensen looked around. No support, no backup. Even the department liaison who had shown up 20 minutes earlier stayed behind the van, avoiding eye contact. Back at the bench, Keanu slowly stood. The crowd instantly leaned in, cameras zoomed closer. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He simply pulled out his phone once more, tapping on the screen. Behind him, a nearby billboard normally cycling through soda ads and real estate listings lit up with a new feed. It was the footage, unedited, raw. Every frame recorded from the hidden cameras over the past several days. There it was, the officer telling him to move along, the coffee thrown at his shoes, the sideways glances, the muttered insults, the little acts of cruelty that built into something crushing. And there was Jensen, grabbing him by the collar, shouting in public. No narration, no titles, just the truth. The crowd went still as the footage played. A silence fell over the park, not out of fear, but recognition. They saw themselves in those clips, the man being ignored, the woman dismissed, the family ushered off a bench for looking out of place. A young mother stood near the front. She clutched her daughter's hand, her voice barely above a whisper. "You did this for us?" Keanu turned to her. His eyes were gentle, voice steady. "For anyone who's ever been ignored." The mother's eyes welled with tears. Her daughter, no older than 6, clutched a stuffed bear and looked up at Keanu like he was something from a storybook. Behind them, reporters lowered their microphones. For a moment, it wasn't about ratings. It wasn't about the scoop. It was about something real, something human. Rivera stepped forward, rubbing his face as if trying to wake from a dream. "This is going viral," he muttered. "Like, the world's watching this." Keanu didn't answer. He didn't need to. Jensen, still standing on the edge of the scene, was now visibly sweating. His shirt clung to his back. He tried to compose himself, but the tremble in his jaw betrayed him. People were pointing. Phones were raised again, this time aimed at him. He finally stepped forward, trying to regain control. This is taken out of context. You can't just post partial clips and ruin someone's career. Keanu tilted his head. These are full recordings. Nothing was edited. Another voice shouted from the crowd. "Then maybe it's time someone did ruin a career like yours." Jensen froze. Rivera placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Walk away, Jensen." Now. Jensen looked like he might resist, but then he saw the television truck had begun a live feed. His name was already being spoken into a microphone by a journalist standing nearby. "This is Officer Jensen," the reporter said, "whose actions you just saw on screen. He's currently being urged to leave the area by fellow Officer Rivera." No statement yet from the department. Jensen backed away slowly. He had nothing left to say. Keanu turned back to the crowd. His voice was soft, but it carried. "We all walk past people every day. On benches, in corners, in silence. And we tell ourselves they don't matter." He looked around. "They do." A teenager near the back called out, "Is this going to be a movie?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Number, this is life." A ripple of emotion swept through the park. Applause started softly, then grew. Not the kind reserved for celebrities, but for something deeper. A truth uncovered. A moment that refused to be ignored. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the grass, the cameras stayed on, but the story was no longer just about one man on a bench. It was about a system, a mirror, and the courage it took to hold it up. The soft hum of approaching sirens cut through the atmosphere, not with panic, but with purpose. A black, unmarked sedan rolled to a slow stop at the edge of the park. Its windows were tinted, but as the door swung open, all eyes shifted toward the figure stepping out. She wore a tailored navy suit, her badge clipped to her belt, and her presence was immediate, calm, firm, unshaken. Captain Ava Monroe of Internal Affairs didn't need to announce herself. The officers nearby stiffened. Even Rivera took a half step back. Monroe walked with quiet authority through the now packed crowd. The sea of bystanders opened before her like a tide parting for a storm. She held a tablet in one hand, scanning the ongoing live stream with narrowed eyes. As she approached, she tapped her earpiece once, confirming something silently with her team. Keanu remained seated on the bench, hands resting calmly on his knees. The phone he had used for the live stream sat beside him, still capturing everything. He looked up as Monroe approached, their eyes meeting for the first time. She gave him a curt nod, then turned toward Officer Jensen, who was now visibly trembling. "Officer Michael Jensen," she said in a voice that sliced through the crowd. "I've reviewed the footage. Multiple counts of misconduct, use of excessive force, verbal threats, insubordination." Jensen tried to speak, but Monroe raised her hand sharply. "You are hereby suspended, effective immediately. Turn over your badge and weapon." The silence was absolute. Then, a gasp swept through the crowd. Jensen hesitated. "I said," Monroe repeated, slower, firmer, "hand them over." With shaking hands, Jensen reached to his belt. He removed his service weapon and badge, placing them carefully in Monroe's outstretched hand. The weight of the moment crushed whatever defiance he had left. He stood there, emptied out, humiliated, and very, very alone. From the back, a woman's voice called out, "Finally!" Then another, "It's about time!" The tension cracked as cheers erupted across the park. Applause, loud and full-throated. Jensen flinched under the sound of it, the sound of his fall made public. Monroe didn't smile. She turned and handed the weapon off to a plainclothes officer standing behind her. Then she faced Keanu directly. For the first time, the crowd grew quiet again. "Mr. Reeves," she said evenly, "on behalf of the department, we owe you an apology." Keanu didn't stand. He looked up at her, then turned his gaze across the park. The young mother still stood nearby, her daughter on her hip. The homeless man from earlier had returned to watch from a shaded bench. A group of teenagers holding skateboards huddled together, watching with wide eyes. Keanu nodded toward them, not Monroe. "You don't owe it to me," he said quietly. "You owe it to them." Monroe followed his eyes and said nothing for a beat. Then she gave the smallest nod, one filled with understanding, not obligation. To be continued. Monroe's gaze swept across the park, taking in the faces of the people Keanu had just acknowledged. The elderly man with the weathered jacket, the girl with paint on her cheeks, the food vendor wiping his hands on his apron. They weren't just bystanders anymore. They were witnesses, participants, symbols of something long overlooked. She turned to Officer Rivera, who had been standing silently to the side. "Officer Rivera," she said, her voice crisp, "your conduct today shows restraint, but your initial response requires review. You'll cooperate fully with the internal investigation." Rivera nodded solemnly. "Understood, Captain." But before Monroe could move on, he added quietly, "Thank you for showing up." There was something raw in his voice, a quiet crack of someone who had seen too much, and maybe failed too many times to say something. Monroe gave him a second look, measuring, not judging. Then she moved on. A journalist approached, mic in hand. "Captain Monroe, can you confirm this was part of an undercover accountability operation? Were you informed of Keanu Reeves' involvement ahead of time?" Monroe held up her hand. "I can confirm this is now an open case under the oversight of internal affairs. That's all I'm prepared to say at this time." The reporter tried to push. "But the footage, millions have seen it. Isn't this a major embarrassment for the department?" Monroe didn't flinch. "What's embarrassing is not being held accountable. Today we were, and that's the beginning of something better." She turned back toward Keanu, who finally rose from the bench. His movements were slow but certain, like a man who had waited long enough. "You planned this?" Monroe asked, not with accusation, but with curiosity. "Not exactly," Keanu replied. "We prepared, but we didn't stage anything. We knew something real would happen if we just sat and listened." Monroe considered that. "Why you? Why here?" Keanu's eyes softened. "Because I'm not the story. They are. This place, this bench, this moment, it reveals who we are when we think no one is watching." A quiet hush settled over the immediate circle. The live stream continued to roll. Thousands were still tuned in, and the comment feed was racing. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a teenage boy stepped forward. He had a backpack slung over one shoulder and a cracked phone in his hand. "Hey, Mr. Reeves," he said nervously, "can I ask, why risk all this? Like, you're famous. You could have just donated to a cause or made a speech. Why come out here like this?" Keanu turned to him slowly. "Because speeches don't change people. Moments do." He looked around once more at the park, the stunned officers, the energized crowd, the stunned silence. "This moment might." The boy nodded slowly, and then, almost instinctively, he raised his phone and began recording from his angle. Others followed. Cameras rose, not just media cameras, but phones from everyday people who now saw something worth sharing, something that belonged to all of them. Monroe exhaled and gave Keanu a final nod. "I'll make sure this doesn't disappear into red tape," she said. "This won't get buried." Keanu didn't reply. He didn't need to. He had already said everything without saying much at all. The bench remained. The story was now everywhere. And it wasn't over yet. By sunrise the next morning, every major news channel had the footage queued and playing on loop. Split screens of Keanu Reeves sitting calmly on a public bench beside flashing headlines flooded the airwaves. One channel read, "Keanu goes undercover, exposes bias in law enforcement." Another, "Hollywood star's quiet protest sparks national debate." The moment Jensen grabbed Keanu's collar became an instant symbol. And the still shot of Keanu saying, "This isn't a test, it's a mirror," echoed through every outlet. Cable anchors scrambled for context. Morning shows led with the story. Talk show hosts, analysts, former police chiefs, social commentators, they all had something to say. Everyone wanted to know how it had been done, how long it had been planned, and more than anything, why. At first, speculation ran wild. Was it a marketing stunt? A secret documentary? Some elaborate social experiment? But within hours, Keanu's team quietly posted a single, unfiltered video to his official channel. No music, no edits. Just the raw footage, trimmed only for time, with a simple title, "This is how we treat the invisible." The video opened with a silent frame of the park, the bench, then the interactions. Jensen's outburst, Rivera's hesitation, Keanu's stillness, the arrival of internal affairs. It ended not with applause or a speech, but with Keanu nodding toward the crowd and saying, "You owe it to them." That line alone was quoted in headlines across the globe. Within the first 4 hours, the video hit 18 million views. Celebrities retweeted it. Human rights organizations applauded it. Civil rights lawyers called it a landmark moment in digital accountability. And everyday people, teachers, delivery drivers, nurses, small business owners, began stitching their own reactions to the footage. People shared their own stories of being ignored, mistreated, profiled, or simply unseen. The hashtag #HumanFirst shot to #1 within 8 hours. And right behind it came another, Keanu in the shadows. It wasn't just about what Keanu did, it was how he did it. No press tour, no public statement, no face-to-face interview on a shiny studio couch. Every media outlet tried. CNN reached out for an exclusive. The Today Show offered a full hour. Even international platforms requested interviews. Keanu declined them all. Instead, his team released a simple message across his social media accounts. It read, "This wasn't about me. This was about what happens when no one is watching. The footage speaks. Let it be heard. We don't need to go viral. We need to go forward." It was signed only with his initials, KR. No photo, no fanfare. And that, ironically, made it even more powerful. Some networks, desperate to fill airtime, tried to stir controversy anyway. They brought in skeptics who accused Keanu of setting up law enforcement. One anchor called it Hollywood manipulation in real time, but others pushed back fiercely. A former federal judge appeared on a national panel and said, "We wouldn't be debating this if the officers had acted with integrity. The camera didn't create the problem, it revealed it." In that moment, what began as a hidden act of observation had become a national mirror. Within a day, high school students began sharing clips during civics class. College professors used it to prompt discussions in ethics seminars. It wasn't just a news item anymore. It had become a lesson. Some officers from departments across the country went online to condemn Jensen's behavior, saying it cast a dark shadow over those who did their jobs with honor. Others confessed, anonymously or otherwise, that the video forced them to confront their own biases. One retired sergeant wrote, "I watched that clip 5 times. Each time, I saw a man I once was, and a man I hope I never become again." In Los Angeles, a mural artist painted Keanu's silhouette sitting silently on a bench, eyes down, with the words, "Be the mirror," across the back wall of a community center. It wasn't commissioned. The city let it stay. Late-night comedians tried to spin the story into a punchline, but the tone quickly shifted. Even in jest, there was respect. One host quipped, "Keanu just dropped the quietest truth bomb of the decade and didn't even stick around to claim credit." Meanwhile, the hashtags grew legs. #HumanFirst flooded Instagram with stories of people standing up for strangers, on buses, in break rooms, outside corner stores. Videos of small, silent acts of kindness filled TikTok. A woman helping an elderly man load groceries. A teen defending a classmate from mockery. A nurse comforting a patient who hadn't had visitors in weeks. The trend wasn't centered on celebrity. It was centered on decency. And Keanu in the shadows became a symbol for doing good without needing applause. Across platforms, artists began drawing Keanu in soft pencil sketches and digital oils, not with sunglasses or movie props, but in plain clothes, sitting on that bench, hands folded, watching quietly. Activists began calling for a national initiative. Within 72 hours, a nonprofit emerged, the Mirror Project. Its mission was simple: equip ordinary citizens with body cams and mobile tools to document injustice peacefully and legally. The tagline borrowed Keanu's words, "Not a test, a mirror." Keanu remained silent through all of it. His team posted one last update, a black screen with white text. "When we forget the human, we fail the future. Start seeing again." In one small diner in Mississippi, an elderly black waitress named Marlene held her phone close to her chest after watching the full video. She whispered to the cook, "That man reminded the world what dignity looks like." In New York, a teenage boy who had been wrongfully profiled just 2 months earlier wrote in the comments, "I cried watching this. I thought I was alone. I'm not." The power of the story was not that Keanu became a hero. It was that he chose not to play one. He didn't need a podium. He chose a bench. He didn't yell. He listened. And when he finally spoke, the entire world leaned in to hear. By the end of the week, over 150 million views had poured in across platforms. The original video remained untouched. No ads, no monetization, just truth, shared freely. And in that silence, the message grew louder. Keanu didn't change the world, but he reminded it how. And that was enough. 2 days later, the park was quiet again. The camera crews were gone. No flashing lights, no reporters asking questions. Just the gentle rustle of leaves, the chirping of birds overhead, and the distant hum of traffic rolling past. Keanu walked slowly along the paved path, his hands in the pockets of a weathered gray hoodie. No sunglasses this time. No hidden mics or streaming equipment. Just him, dressed like any other person taking a walk after a long week. He paused as he neared the familiar bench, the one that had become the center of a national conversation. It looked just as it had before. The paint was chipped. One of the wooden slats had a slight crack running through it. But it was still standing, still quiet, still offering space for anyone willing to sit and be still. He sat down slowly, his body tired but his spirit calm. The wind was cool against his skin, brushing the edges of his sleeves. He leaned back and exhaled deeply. He didn't expect anyone to recognize him now. No cameras, no spotlight, just stillness. But then he noticed the slow shuffle of feet on gravel. Someone approaching carefully, deliberately. An elderly woman with silver hair, dressed in a simple floral blouse and navy cardigan. She held a reusable shopping bag in one hand and a gentle, almost hesitant smile on her face. Keanu looked up, offering a polite nod. She stopped in front of the bench, studying him carefully, as if piecing together something she'd already known in her heart. "Do you mind if I sit?" she asked, her voice soft and kind. "Not at all," Keanu replied, sliding over to make room. She lowered herself carefully, her joints creaking slightly as she settled into the bench beside him. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke, just the breeze and the sound of a distant bird singing in a tree nearby. "I know who you are," she said finally, without looking at him. Keanu didn't respond right away. He waited. "I saw the video," she continued. "My granddaughter showed me. Said it was all over the internet." He nodded slowly. "She thought it was cool. Said you exposed corruption." The woman chuckled faintly. "But that's not what struck me." Keanu turned his head, gently curious. "What struck me," she said, "was how long you sat here. How quiet you were. How patient." She turned toward him now, her eyes filled with a kind of aching warmth. "I sit here too, sometimes. Every Tuesday. I don't have many friends left and my son's always working. I come here just to feel visible. But most people walk by." She reached into her bag, pulled out a small paper cup with tea, and took a slow sip. "But that day," she continued, "you made people stop. You made them look, even if they didn't know it was you." Keanu lowered his gaze. "It wasn't about me." She smiled. "I know that." She looked out at the trees now, her eyes growing misty. "You made me feel seen." Her voice broke slightly. She dabbed at the corners of her eyes with a handkerchief. Keanu turned to her. "So many people go unseen. All it takes is slowing down, paying attention." She nodded through quiet tears. "Thank you," she whispered. The woman sat in silence for a long moment, her hands gently cupping the warm paper teacup. Keanu didn't rush her. He just sat there with her, the way he had sat alone for hours, during that long day, listening, watching, waiting. Now, it wasn't a performance. It was something truer, deeper. She glanced sideways, her voice low. "You know, when my husband passed 5 years ago, this bench became my refuge. We used to sit here every Sunday. He liked watching the squirrels. Said they reminded him of our kids always running off somewhere, always coming back with trouble in their hands." Keanu smiled softly. "He sounds like someone I would have liked." She chuckled gently. "He would have liked you too, especially after what you did." He didn't. Respond. His eyes remained fixed on the small garden just beyond the path. A few bees buzzed near the blooms. The stillness felt sacred. People don't realize how much it means, she continued. To be noticed, even for a second. You didn't yell, you didn't argue. You just let the world watch. Keanu finally turned to her. I just wanted to give others a mirror. She nodded slowly. And sometimes that mirror shows people what they'd rather not see. A breeze rustled through the leaves above them. She tucked her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. I used to be a teacher, she said. 40 years in the classroom. You learn to spot pain in a child's eyes before they know how to speak it. And what I saw on your face during that live stream, it wasn't just acting. You've known that kind of silence before, haven't you? Keanu didn't speak. You've sat in rooms where no one heard you, she continued, more gently now. You've walked streets where people look through you. That's why it hit so hard. Keanu nodded once. Yeah. She placed her tea down beside her, letting her hand rest against the edge of the bench. It's funny, she said. The world sees stars like you and thinks your life must be so loud, so full. But what you showed us was the opposite. He looked at her with quiet gratitude. My granddaughter cried watching it, she added. She's 16, thinks no one listens to her either. But that night, she said, if Keanu can sit there and still matter, maybe I can too. Keanu swallowed. The weight of that sentence settled in his chest like a soft ache. She matters, he said quietly. They all do. The woman reached into her bag again and pulled out a folded photograph. It was faded around the edges. She handed it to him. It showed her and her late husband sitting on this same bench maybe 30 years earlier, both laughing as if someone had just told a wonderful joke. Keanu studied the photo. You kept coming back here for him. I kept coming back here for me, she whispered, to remember what it meant to be seen. She took the photo back and slid it gently into her cardigan pocket. Promise me something, she said, turning to him. What is it? Don't stop doing what you're doing, she said, even if no one's watching. Keanu nodded, eyes soft, especially when no one's watching. She smiled. Then I guess we'll both keep coming back to this bench. They sat together in silence, letting the wind carry the rest. No cameras, no statements. Just two souls sharing a moment quiet, sacred, and fully seen. The city had already moved on to the next headline, but inside a small two-story home in a quiet neighborhood, time had slowed down. A week had passed since the video went viral. 7 days since Captain Ava Monroe handed down the suspension. But for Officer Dean Jensen, every hour since had felt like a slow-motion fall, steady, silent, and sickening. He sat at the edge of his couch, elbows on knees, staring at the television. The screen showed a paused frame from the video. Keanu Reeves, sitting silently on that cold metal bench, eyes downcast, clothes disheveled, posture humble. Behind him, Jensen stood, face hard, arms crossed. The image had circled the globe. The news anchors had moved on from outrage to analysis. Pundits debated policy reform. Commentators broke down his body language like sports footage. Memes mocked his voice. Even his name had become a trending hashtag, but not the kind anyone wanted. Number, Jensen Justice was one of them. Another simply read, Number, be better than Jensen. Internal Affairs had opened a case file thicker than a law textbook. Turns out, Keanu's footage triggered a second wave of whistleblowers. Complaints that had once been brushed off as misunderstandings were being pulled back into the light. Citizens who'd been too afraid to speak before were suddenly finding their voices. The house was quiet, except for the occasional sound of the fridge humming and the soft murmur of a cartoon from the next room. Jensen stared at his badge, which now sat in a drawer rather than on his chest. The department hadn't fired him yet. But the union was quiet, his phone hadn't rung, and no one had come by. He hadn't spoken to Rivera since the hearing. Last he heard, Rivera was reassigned to a desk job and scheduled for mandatory sensitivity training. Jensen wanted to be angry at him. But the truth was, Rivera had seen it coming before Jensen did. That haunted look Rivera gave him outside the precinct, he should have known then. The system had changed, or at least the people watching had. He pressed play. The footage rolled. His voice sounded foreign now, loud, dismissive, arrogant. When he barked at Keanu to leave the park, he remembered feeling powerful, in control. Now, hearing it back, it sounded petty, cruel, inhuman. Then came the moment he leaned closer to Keanu and said the words that had echoed across the internet like a siren. "You're just another nobody who thinks the rules don't apply." He flinched. The camera had caught Keanu's expression in that moment. No anger, no panic, just sadness. And underneath it, a quiet, defiant dignity that needed no words. A door creaked open behind him. His daughter, Sophie, padded into the room. She wore her fuzzy socks and her favorite pink unicorn hoodie. She rubbed one eye with the back of her hand, the way she always did when she woke from a nap. "Daddy?" she said sleepily. He turned, quickly pausing the video. "Yeah, sweetheart?" She walked over and climbed onto the couch beside him, curling into his side like she always did when she was little. He tried to smile, brushing a loose curl from her forehead. But she looked at the remote, then at the television screen, which still showed Keanu's slumped figure paused mid-frame. She looked back at him. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Daddy, why were you so mean to that man?" Jensen froze. Jensen didn't answer right away. He stared at the television, then at his daughter's face, so open, so innocent. Sophie didn't ask with judgment. She asked with confusion, as if trying to understand how the man who tucked her in every night, who read her stories, who made her pancakes in the shape of hearts, could also be the man in that video. He swallowed hard. "I don't know," he said finally. "I really don't." She leaned against him, her small head resting on his chest. The weight of her presence made the silence heavier. "I thought he was pretending," he added after a pause. "I thought he was causing trouble. I thought I was doing my job." Sophie blinked up at him. "But you didn't listen to him." "No," Jensen admitted. "I didn't." She reached for the remote and pressed play again, not waiting for permission. The footage continued Keanu being told to move along, then the confrontation, and finally, the moment the crowd had gathered and Jensen's control had crumbled. Her tiny hand slipped into his. "Did you say sorry?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "Number I didn't." She didn't scold. She just squeezed his fingers. "You should." That night, after Sophie went to bed, Jensen sat in the dark with his laptop open and a blank email on the screen. He didn't know where to start. Keanu Reeves didn't need an apology from him. Not really. The world had already seen everything. But the truth was, Jensen needed to say it. Not for social media, not for the news, for himself, and maybe for Sophie. He typed, erased, typed again. The final version was only a few lines. "I watched the footage, all of it. You didn't speak because you didn't need to. Your actions said everything. I see now what I failed to see then. I was wrong. I was blind to my own bias, and I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I'm sorry for that day, and for every day before, when I didn't do better. I'm trying now." He didn't hit send, not yet, but it was written, and sometimes that was the first step. The following morning, Jensen walked into the precinct, not as an officer on duty, but as a man on the other side of consequences. His nameplate had already been removed. His locker was taped shut. He nodded at Rivera, who stood quietly at the desk, sorting files. Rivera gave him a look, not smug, not cold, just tired. "See you at training," Rivera muttered. "Yeah," Jensen replied. As he walked back to his car, he passed a newsstand. Keanu's face was on the cover of 3 magazines. One headline read, "Hollywood Star Turns Mirror on America." Another simply said, "Dignity doesn't shout, it listens." Jensen got into his car and pulled out a notepad. He flipped to a clean page and wrote something new. Not a report, not a memo. Just a note to himself. Start listening. The sun had barely risen when Keanu returned to the park. It was quiet again, just like the first morning he sat there in disguise. The chaos had passed. The news vans were gone. The crowd had dispersed, and only the faint rustle of leaves filled the air. The bench stood where it always had, aged but strong, its wood darkened by years of weather and stories no one had ever heard. Keanu approached slowly, his hands in the pockets of his jacket. This time, he wasn't dressed in rags or hidden behind layers of grime. He was just himself: jeans, a black hoodie, boots dusted with the early dew. No cameras followed, no press stood waiting. No one even glanced his way. And that was exactly how he wanted it. He sat down on the bench, right where it had all started. He looked around the park. A jogger passed in the distance. A mother pushed a stroller near the path, and an elderly man fed pigeons near the fountain. Life was moving on, but for him, this place would always hold something deeper. It was the ground where silence had spoken louder than outrage, where listening had changed something more than shouting ever could. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. No logo, no name, just clean, plain, stationery. He smoothed it on his knee, then bent forward and slipped it underneath the bench, tucking it between the slats, where only someone sitting long enough would notice. The message was short. To the next soul who rests here, you matter. He sat back. No fanfare, no announcement, just a whisper, meant for someone else who needed to hear it. Maybe a teenager who felt invisible in a world obsessed with status. Maybe a mother struggling to feed her children without judgment. Maybe a veteran whose uniform had become a burden instead of a badge. Or maybe someone like Jensen once was hardened, blind to nuance, in need of a jolt that only humility could provide. Whoever it would be, the message waited. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment. The breeze stirred his hair. He let the silence sink in. Then he stood. He gave the bench one last look, then turned and walked away. As he reached the end of the path, he paused at the edge of the sidewalk. Across the street, a small group of people had begun to gather. Not reporters, not paparazzi, just citizens. A teacher, a barista, a man holding a cardboard sign that read, "Justice looks different when you sit down." Someone waved at Keanu. He nodded once, but didn't cross. He had done what he came to do. He didn't need to speak again. The bench would carry the story now. As Keanu disappeared into the morning haze, the note under the bench remained. Just paper and ink, but its weight was immeasurable. Later that day, a teenager named Elijah walked through the park. He had skipped school. Again. His backpack sagged off one shoulder, and his hoodie was pulled over his head like a shield. He'd been feeling off for weeks, like no one saw him, like no one cared if he came or went. He slumped onto the bench, kicked at a stray leaf, and sighed. That's when he noticed the corner of paper peeking out beneath the bench. He reached down, curious, and pulled it free. The message was written in careful handwriting. To the next soul who rests here, you matter. He blinked at the words, then read them again. His throat tightened. No name, no explanation. Just a truth he hadn't heard in too long. He folded the note, tucked it into his pocket, and sat there a little longer, staring at the trees. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel the urge to leave. He didn't feel the weight so heavy. Someone had written those words, and they meant them. Maybe they didn't know him, but they saw him. Somehow. Elsewhere in the city, Keanu's silent message began to ripple. Photos of the bench started appearing online. A woman who walked her dog there each day posted a picture of the empty bench with the caption, "Something feels different here today, like peace." A local librarian found the note 2 days later and laminated it. She made copies and left them inside the library's books between pages of novels and tucked into self-help guides. Soon, others started writing their own notes and slipping them under benches in different parks, bus stops, and train stations. Each message was unique, but the theme echoed. You matter. I see you. You're not alone. The hashtag number Keanu's bench began trending, but Keanu never acknowledged it. He didn't post, he didn't speak. He let the movement grow without him. Talk shows tried to track him down. They wanted interviews, statements, a soundbite, but Keanu turned them all down gently. This wasn't about fame. It wasn't a performance. It was a mirror held up to a system and to ourselves. A retired veteran in Ohio saw the viral video and wrote a post about the last time he was treated with kindness. His story was shared 40,000 times. A homeless woman in Portland filmed her own story beneath a bus shelter. "People walk past me every day," she said, "but today, someone left a note in my cup. It just said, 'You're enough.'" I cried. These weren't just stories anymore. They were sparks. Everywhere, people began to pay attention in new ways. They slowed down. They looked closer. Some apologized to strangers. Some started small kindness projects. And some simply sat beside someone who looked alone. It wasn't a revolution of noise. It was a revolution of notice. And at the center of it all stood an empty bench, holding a silent message beneath it, placed there by a man who never needed credit, only change. The world didn't erupt. It softened. And sometimes that's more powerful. It didn't take a speech. It didn't require confrontation, shouting, or spectacle. Keanu Reeves did not demand change. He simply became still enough for the world to see what it was ignoring. One man, one bench, one quiet act of presence. That's all it took to unravel an illusion many believed was reality. Injustice often hides behind routine. It thrives in the spaces where people are too busy, too distracted, or too comfortable to notice. But when Keanu chose to sit there, dressed like someone society too often forgets, he invited the world to look again. And when they looked, they couldn't unsee it. A uniformed officer's casual cruelty. A second officer's silence. The bystanders who hesitated. And then the voices that rose not in anger, but in courage. It wasn't Keanu who changed the world. It was the mirror he held up. Because change begins not with action, but with awareness. So much of human dignity rests on being seen. And in that moment, by allowing himself to be treated like the invisible, Keanu illuminated just how many others have lived that way day after day, year after year. He didn't point fingers. He pointed inward. He let the truth speak, without adding volume, without framing it, without trying to steal focus. He simply stepped aside and let the world witness itself. And that changed everything. The officer who once stood with swagger now sits under investigation. The department that looked the other way now reviews years of overlooked complaints. A city that once scrolled past injustice now scrolls with intent, reading, watching, reflecting. But perhaps the most powerful change happened off camera. It happened in the silence that followed. It happened in the homes where fathers paused before lecturing their children, in classrooms where teachers sat a little longer beside the quiet kid in the back row, in coffee shops where customers finally asked the barista how her day was, in small corners of the world where someone chose not to walk by but to sit down instead, all because a man sat still. There's something profound about the absence of accusation, about resisting the urge to prove someone wrong with louder words, and instead letting truth be its own witness. That's what Keanu did. He didn't need to be right. He only needed to be real. And in that reality, countless people saw themselves for the first time, not because of his fame, not because of the viral headlines, but because the moment was honest and unpolished. It was uncomfortable, unrehearsed, raw. It was also undeniable, and that's what made it powerful. If you've ever felt invisible, type "I matter" in the comments, because you do. Even if no one said it today, even if you've spent months or years waiting for someone to notice, you matter. Your story matters. Your presence, your voice, your journey, it all carries weight. And if you've ever seen someone being mistreated, what did you do? What would you do now? We want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments, not just for us, but for others reading. Your words might be the message someone else needs to hear, just like that note on the bench. Maybe we can't all wear disguises and walk into the world like Keanu did, but we can all sit on our own version of that bench. We can pause in a moment that matters. We can listen when it would be easier to speak. We can offer presence where silence once lived. That's the legacy of this story. Not just what Keanu did, but what it inspired others to do. A teacher in Iowa wrote that she changed her seating chart so every student would sit next to someone new each week. "We all need to be seen," she wrote, "and not just by the ones who already know us." A barista in New Mexico started writing kind notes on every to-go cup, inspired by the bench message, "You matter." She said a man cried when he read it. A city bus driver in Detroit left a seat empty with a rose on it and a handwritten sign taped to the window, reserved for someone who thought no one noticed. It spread because it was true. Sometimes, the smallest truths spark the loudest changes. Keanu never issued a public statement, never held a press conference, never accepted an interview. He didn't need to. His team released a single video online. It was raw footage of the moment on the bench, unedited, no commentary, just truth. At the end, black text appeared on the screen. "This is how we treat the invisible. Change starts now." That video went viral in less than 24 hours, over 30 million views, hundreds of thousands of shares, tens of thousands of comments. But the hashtags that followed weren't about Keanu. They were about all of us. Number, human first. Number, Keanu in the shadows. Number, I see you. People shared their own moments of injustice. They shared the stories they'd never had the courage to say aloud. Times they were ignored, times they were profiled, times they were dismissed. And for every heartbreaking story, there was a comment beneath it from someone saying, "I believe you. I'm sorry. I see you." It was as if the internet, for once, became a bench, a place for people to sit, to speak, to be heard. And slowly, quietly, healing began. That's what happens when stories make space. This one did. And now, it's your turn. If something in you stirred while watching this video, don't ignore it. Let it move you. Let it remind you that the world doesn't change from the top down. It changes from eye level, from where you are. So today, try it. Look around. Pause. Ask yourself, who is sitting alone? Who is never spoken to? Who flinches when an officer walks by? Then don't walk past them. Sit, listen, say something kind. It doesn't take a movie star. It doesn't take money or power or fame. It takes presence. And presence is something we all have to give. So tell us, what would you do if you saw someone being mistreated? Would you speak up? Sit beside them? Tell their story? Write your answer in the comments. Someone needs to read it. And if you've ever felt invisible, type "I matter" in the comments. Let those 2 words echo through this community. Let them remind others that they are not alone. This is more than a video. It's an incredible story. One of dignity, awareness, and the power of quiet courage. And if this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. We tell incredible stories like this every week, and your support helps us reach more hearts. See you in the next one. You matter, always.